The 1980s were a wild time for American cars. A mix of turbocharged experiments, downsized dreams, and bold design risks. But hidden beneath the IROCs, GTs, and Grand Nationals were machines so rare, so quietly built, they vanished almost instantly. These weren't just low production models. They were ghosts on wheels. Some were dealer specials, some were prototypes, and some were simply forgotten the moment they left the factory. Here are 12 of the ultra-rarest American cars of the 1980s, and chances are you never even knew they existed. Number 1. The 1986 Pontiac Grand Prix 2+2 Aero Coupe is one of those ultra-obscure, purpose-built oddities that most people pass off as just another quirky 1980s two-door until they realize it was a low-production, homologation special crafted with one singular goal: to make Pontiac competitive on NASCAR superspeedways. Born from necessity, shaped by racing regulations, and misunderstood by the public, the 2+2 Aero Coupe may not have been fast or luxurious, but it was undeniably important. And today, it's one of the rarest and strangest vehicles Pontiac ever put into production. In the mid-1980s, the world of NASCAR was evolving quickly. Aerodynamics were becoming just as important as horsepower. At tracks like Daytona and Talladega, high-speed stability could make or break a car, literally. By 1986, GM had found some success on the oval tracks with the Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS, but it wasn't enough. NASCAR required that cars used in competition had to be production-based. Specifically, at least 1,000 units had to be sold to the public. Chevrolet created the SS Aero Coupe, with a sloped rear window and a shortened deck lid designed to eliminate turbulent airflow at 190+ mph. It worked. So Pontiac, wanting to get in on the Aero arms race, needed its own equivalent. But the Grand Prix wasn't shaped like the Monte Carlo, and that meant Pontiac had to build something different from the ground up. The result was the Grand Prix 2+2 Aero Coupe, a unique limited-run version of the standard Grand Prix Coupe, but with radically altered bodywork that made it look like something straight off the NASCAR grid. To meet homologation rules, Pontiac had to sell at least 1,000 street versions. They made exactly 1,200 to win. All were built in 1980s and all were identical in form, finished in silver metallic paint with dark lower accents, modest 2+2 graphics, and styled in a way that hinted at Daytona, not downtown. Most striking was the rear window, a massive, curved, bubble fastback piece of glass that dramatically altered the car's profile. The design was engineered to allow air to flow more cleanly off the roof and over the trunk, reducing drag and improving rear downforce on high-speed bank turns. The rear deck lid was shortened and sloped, with an integrated lip spoiler. Up front, the 2+2 received a custom aerodynamic nose cone with integrated quad headlights and a deep front air dam, improving both airflow and the car's visual aggression. Even at a glance, it didn't look like a normal Grand Prix. It looked like a factory race car. But once you opened the door, reality set in. Inside, the 2+2 was still very much a base model Grand Prix. Cloth bench seats, column shifter, simple instrumentation, and little in the way of performance options. Under the hood was GM's familiar 305 cubic inch 5.0L small block V8, rated at a meager 165 horsepower, paired to a 4-speed turbo hydromatic 204R automatic. There were no available upgrades, no manual option, and no performance package to liven things up. On paper, it was more of a cruiser than a bruiser. And yet, none of that mattered. The whole purpose of the 2+2 wasn't to dominate stoplight drag races. It was to meet the letter of NASCAR's rules so that Pontiac's racing teams could compete with an aerodynamic edge. Teams like King Racing, led by Richard Petty, and other independent Pontiac efforts used the 2+2 body to improve their odds against Ford Thunderbirds and Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupes. The body's lower drag coefficient helped on the straights, and the bubble window reduced the lift and buffeting that plagued traditional upright rear glass at high speeds. Unfortunately, the success was short-lived. NASCAR allowed the body for just a couple of years, and in 1987, new rules and shifting competitive dynamics rendered the 2+2's advantage moot. Pontiac, already struggling with budget constraints and declining public interest in two-door personal coupes, quietly dropped the 2+2 after just one model year. No replacement was ever made. The project had served its purpose, but that purpose had a very short shelf life. A longtime Pontiac collector once remarked, "People thought it was a Monte Carlo clone with a funny nose. Then I told them how rare it was. They had no idea. It wasn't fast, but it was built to win, and that made it special." Today, the 1986 Pontiac Grand Prix 2+2 Aero Coupe is considered a unicorn in Pontiac's already eclectic back catalog. With only 225 built and far fewer surviving in original condition, it's among the rarest production Pontiacs of the 1980s. Enthusiasts love it not for what it could do on the street, but for what it represented. A factory-built race homologation special, disguised as a conservative coupe. It's a piece of NASCAR history that somehow made it into dealerships, driven not by public demand, but by the demands of the high bank turns of Daytona and Talladega. Number 2. The 1982 Dodge Mirada CMX 360 is one of those glorious oddballs from the twilight of the American personal luxury coupe era. A car that somehow slipped through the cracks of both muscle car history and Chrysler's front-drive future. Built during a time when Dodge was clawing its way out of financial ruin and preparing for the lean, efficient K-car age, the CMX 360 was an unapologetically anachronistic throwback. A final, desperate flex of V8 muscle wrapped in Baroque formality and wrapped in layers of chrome and vinyl. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did. And for a select few lucky or unlucky buyers, it was a weird, thunderous swan song for Dodge's rear-drive bruisers. Let's set the stage. By the early 1980s, American performance was a shadow of what it had been a decade earlier. Emissions standards were tightening, fuel prices were still volatile, and Chrysler, having just escaped bankruptcy in 1980, was pivoting hard toward economy and practicality. The future was front-wheel drive, turbocharged 4s, and Lee Iacocca's K-car platform. But tucked away in a quiet corner of Dodge showrooms was the Mirada, a handsome rear-wheel drive two-door personal coupe based on Chrysler's aging J-body architecture, shared with the Chrysler Cordoba and Imperial. Most Miradas were soft, sedate cruisers, powered by slant-six engines or underwhelming 318 V8s, with suspension tuning designed more for marshmallow comfort than spirited driving. But the CMX trim was something else entirely. Billed as the sport luxury variant, it featured unique trim, upgraded interiors, special badging, and in rare cases, a surprise under the hood. Chrysler's 360 cubic inch, 5.9-liter V8. In 1982, this was the last year the big 360 was offered in a car, and only a handful of CMX buyers ticked the box before it disappeared. No official production numbers were published by Dodge for the CMX 360 combo, but surviving dealership records and registry data suggest the number built was well under 500, possibly fewer than 300. Some experts believe as few as 132 were factory-equipped with the 360, making it one of the rarest V8 Mopars of the era. The engine itself was a holdover from Chrysler's muscle years, though by 1982, it had been severely neutered by emissions equipment and fuel economy mandates. Still, in a lightweight rear-drive coupe like the Mirada, it had enough torque to light up the rear tires and make its presence known at stoplights. Performance was modest by 1970 standards, but downright thrilling compared to the sea of four-cylinder imports and wheezing V6s clogging dealer lots in the early Reagan era. And then there was the sound. The CMX 360 had a surprisingly deep, rumbling exhaust note that seemed completely at odds with its formal roofline, fake wire wheel covers, opera windows, and vinyl accents. It was a contradiction on wheels. One part aspiring Cordoba, one part burnout machine. The Mirada CMX looked ready for dinner at a steakhouse, but behaved like it belonged at a backwoods drag strip. A former owner from Illinois once recalled, "People didn't know what to make of it. It looked like a Cordoba with a mustache, but it sounded like a Charger that had escaped from a trailer park demolition derby." It was fantastic. Despite the charm and uniqueness, the CMX 360 didn't last. The engine option was dropped after 1982, and the Mirada itself limped along with less powerful engines until it was discontinued after the 1983 model year. By that time, Chrysler was pouring all of its resources into K-cars and minivans, and anything resembling rear-wheel drive personal luxury performance was dead on arrival. Today, the 1982 Dodge Mirada CMX 360 is a true rarity, a forgotten V8-powered footnote from an era when most American cars were downsizing, softening, and conforming. It represents that strange transitional period between the gas-guzzling freedom of the 70s and the computerized restraint of the 80s, when manufacturers occasionally threw caution to the wind and built something completely out of sync with the market. Collectors lucky enough to find one and verify its authenticity own a piece of Mopar history that defies easy categorization. It's not a muscle car, not really a luxury car, and certainly not a sports car. But it's all of them, in some strange, rebellious way. It might not be pretty, it might not be fast, but it is unmistakably, unapologetically rare. A true V8 howler in the disguise of a disco lounge on wheels. Number 3. The 1984 Chevrolet Caprice Classic Sport Coupe is one of those curious artifacts from a fading era, a leftover dream from the days when full-size, two-door American coupes roamed the highways in thunderous, V8-powered dignity. By the mid-1980s, that dream was rapidly unraveling. Aerodynamics were in, downsizing was the norm, and consumer tastes were shifting toward compact sedans, fuel efficiency, and front-wheel drive. The Caprice Coupe, in that context, was an anachronism, a land yacht that somehow kept sailing long after the tide had turned. And yet, Chevrolet still offered it, quietly and for only a select few, in the form of the 1984 Caprice Classic Sport Coupe. Though most people today associate the Caprice with fleet-spec sedans, police cruisers, or boxy family haulers, it actually began life in the 60s and 70s as a stylish, top-trim luxury car with coupe, sedan, and even convertible variants. Through the 1970s, two-door Caprices were still relatively common. But by 1980, buyer interest in full-size coupes was fading fast. The fuel crises of the previous decade, combined with rising insurance costs and changing tastes, made large coupes impractical and uncool for most American drivers. Still, Chevrolet held out hope. For 1982 through 1985, it continued offering the Caprice Classic in two-door form, a curious move considering nearly all its competitors had dropped theirs. The 1984 model, in particular, stands out because of how few people actually ordered it. That year, fewer than 3,500 Caprice Classic Sport Coupes were produced, a vanishingly small number for a brand like Chevrolet, which routinely sold hundreds of thousands of vehicles annually. It's one of the lowest production two-door Caprices of the entire B-body generation. Why so few? Because in many ways the car was a paradox. It had the long, imposing shape of a car built for 1974, not 1984. The doors were massive. The hood stretched like a landing strip. The quarter panels reached back in straight formal lines ending in a squared-off trunk lid. It wasn't sleek or edgy or modern. It looked like it had driven straight out of the Carter administration and somehow ended up parked at a Reagan-era strip mall. To younger buyers, it was hopelessly outdated. To older buyers, it just seemed unnecessary when the four-door version was more practical. And yet, for a very specific kind of customer, often in the South or in rural markets, the two-door Caprice still held appeal. It was big, rear-wheel drive, and powered by a dependable V8. Most 1984 sport coupes came with the ubiquitous 305 cubic inch small block V8, paired to a 3-speed or 4-speed automatic. It wasn't quick, but it was smooth, predictable, and torquey enough to feel muscular at low speeds. In select regions, particularly in dealer groups closer to Chevrolet performance culture, a few sport coupes were ordered with optional dual exhaust, rally wheels, sport mirrors, and heavy-duty suspensions. These regional packages transformed the car from a sleepy highway floater into something resembling a low-key sleeper cruiser. But even with those options, the Caprice Coupe couldn't shake its outdated image. GM's own design language had moved on. Pontiac had ditched its full-size coupes, Buick was banking on turbocharged Regals. Oldsmobile had pivoted to the more aerodynamic Cutlass Supreme. Chevrolet itself was putting more emphasis on the Monte Carlo SS. Sleeker, faster, and far more fashionable. Next to that, the Caprice Coupe looked like an old man trying to dance at a disco. A former owner from Alabama recalled, "It was the kind of car your grandfather bought when he didn't like the way the new stuff looked. Long, heavy, no nonsense. You didn't drive it fast, you just rolled. It felt like it was floating on tires made of clouds and bourbon." By 1986, the Caprice Coupe was quietly removed from Chevrolet's lineup with almost no fanfare. The sedan would live on for nearly a decade longer, soldiering into the 1990s in classic cop car form, but the two-door body style never returned. The full-size V8-powered American Coupe, at least in its traditional rear-wheel drive, body-on-frame form, was now officially dead at Chevy. Today, the 1984 Caprice Classic Sport Coupe is astonishingly rare. Most were driven hard, parked outside, and eventually crushed or cannibalized for parts. Few people saw the value in preserving such a slow-selling oddity, but among B-body enthusiasts and vintage GM collectors, it has become something of a unicorn. Clean examples, especially those with sport packages or dealer performance options, command serious interest at shows and auctions. It's a car that doesn't try to be flashy or fast. It just is. Big, square, slow, smooth. A rolling contradiction from a moment in time when the past and future of American car culture were colliding in the middle of a showroom. Number 4, the 1980 AMC Eagle SX4 Sport Coupe with a 4-speed manual is one of the strangest and most fascinating outliers in American automotive history, not just because it came from AMC, the scrappiest of the Detroit underdogs, but because it arguably invented an entire category of vehicle before the rest of the world even realized they wanted it. A two-door hatchback with permanent all-wheel drive, rugged ground clearance, and just enough off-road capability to embarrass trucks in snow or mud, the SX4 wasn't just quirky, it was prophetic. This car was born from pure necessity. By the late 1970s, AMC was in trouble. The Gremlin, Pacer, and Matador had run their course. The Jeep CJ and Wagoneer were still selling well, but AMC needed to bridge the gap between traditional passenger cars and its off-road lineup. They didn't have the money to develop an all-new platform, so instead, AMC engineers pulled one of the most clever corporate hacks in automotive history. They took the humble Concorde chassis, itself an evolution of the Hornet, added Jeep-sourced drivetrain components, and lifted the entire body several inches off the ground. The result was the AMC Eagle, which launched in 1980 as a sedan, wagon, and coupe, all boasting full-time all-wheel drive in an era when that was still considered exotic, even in Europe. But while the wagons became AMC's bread and butter for snowy states and ski towns, the real oddball was the SX4, a two-door hatchback with muscular proportions, fender flares, optional hood decals, and a stance that looked like a rally car had wandered out of the forest and ended up in a suburban driveway. It had flared wheel arches, a wide C-pillar, and a liftback rear hatch that made it surprisingly practical. In sport trim, it got color-matched trim, styled steel wheels, a tachometer, and sometimes even a roof spoiler. No one really knew what to call it. It wasn't a muscle car, it wasn't a sports car, it wasn't quite a Jeep, but it had touches of all three. The rarest configuration of all came in that launch year, 1980, when a small batch of early SX4 Sport Coupes were built with the 4-speed manual transmission paired to the 258 cubic inch inline-six 4.2L and the full-time select track on all-wheel drive system. These early 4 speeds were short-lived. AMC quickly transitioned to a 5-speed option and automatic for broader market appeal, and most buyers chose wagons over coupes. Estimates suggest that fewer than 600 SX4s were built in that exact 1980 configuration. Sport trim, 4-speed, 2-door, 6-cylinder. Many of those went to rural states and were driven into the ground, leaving very few survivors today. One Vermont mechanic who owned one from new said, "It was like a Mustang had a baby with a Jeep. I could drive it through snowdrifts, hop curbs, and still fit into a normal parking space. No one understood what it was, but I never got stuck. And he was right. The SX4 could do things no car its size had any right to. The combination of lightweight, high ground clearance, and real mechanical AWD made it incredibly capable off pavement. Add the low gearing of the 4-speed manual, and you had a hatchback that could claw its way up muddy forest trails or power through mountain roads when most imports would spin helplessly. It wasn't fast. The 6-cylinder only made around 110-115 horsepower, but it had low-end grunt and a willingness to be pushed hard, especially with the sport package suspension upgrades. But this car was more than a gimmick. In hindsight, it was decades ahead of its time. The SX4 prefigured the rise of the crossover SUV, the rally-inspired AWD coupe, and even the modern off-road hatchback movement. In a world before the Subaru Outback Sport, the Audi Allroad, or the Ford Maverick FX4, AMC had already figured it out and built it using 1970s hardware and desperation-fueled innovation. Unfortunately, the SX4 was too early for its audience. It confused buyers who didn't understand what it was for, and AMC, never great at marketing, couldn't quite sell the concept with the slickness of bigger brands. After just a few years, production dwindled. The coupe was gone by 1983. The Eagle wagon survived until 1980, but the coupe versions, like the SX4, faded into obscurity. Today, finding what especially a 1980 4-speed sport model, is nearly impossible. But among those who know, the SX4 is a legend. It didn't just break the mold, it anticipated the future. And it did it while looking like a cross between a Tonka truck and a rally weapon. As one owner once put it, it was a lifted sports car for people who lived in the woods, way ahead of its time. And that might be the best summary of the Eagle SX4, a misfit masterpiece that, like AMC itself, was misunderstood, underfunded, and absolutely brilliant in its own strange way. Number 5. The 1987 Buick GNX wasn't just a muscle car, it was a legend forged in defiance of expectations, a final act of rebellion from a company known more for soft, quiet luxury than street-scorching performance. Born from the bones of the Buick Regal and sculpted into something dark and mythic, the GNX, short for Grand National Experimental, was the last and greatest chapter in the saga of GM's turbocharged sleepers. It was also a parting shot from the dying G-body platform, and it went out not with a whimper, but a mechanical roar so potent that even the Corvette flinched. The Buick Grand National had already gained notoriety by 1986 as a blacked-out menace with turbocharged V6 power, an anti-hero to the traditional muscle car formula. No V8, no convertible, just raw torque and sinister looks. But for 1987, Buick decided to build a version so radical, so brutally fast, that it could become the stuff of whispered legend. Partnering with A.S. McLaren, the engineering wizards behind some of GM's most exotic development work, Buick created the GNX, a limited edition factory hot rod disguised as a quiet, boxy Buick coupe. Only 547 GNX were produced, each one finished in menacing black, devoid of chrome, and fitted with special badging and black mesh wheels. The body looked nearly identical to a regular Grand National at first glance, but the GNX had subtle tweaks: functional fender vents to relieve under-hood pressure, a revised front air dam, and GNX-specific rear suspension geometry that enhanced grip and handling under hard acceleration. The heart of the GNX was a reworked 3.8-liter turbocharged and intercooled V6. Officially rated at 276 horsepower and 360 sub-FT of torque, the true output was closer to, and likely beyond, 300 HP and 400 Newton-meters. Buick deliberately underrated it, perhaps out of modesty or perhaps to avoid embarrassing the Corvette, GM's sports car flagship. But no one was fooled. In instrumented tests, the GNX regularly outran every American performance car on the market, including the contemporary Corvette. Car and Driver tested it at 0 to 60 in just 4.7 seconds, faster than a Ferrari 328, faster than a Porsche 911 of the era. The quarter mile? A scorching 13.5 seconds at over 100 mph. But the GNX wasn't just about acceleration. ASC McLaren engineered a unique suspension system, including a torque arm setup and panhard bar in the rear, which kept the car planted under brutal launches and eliminated much of the wheel hop that plagued lesser Regals. Wider Goodyear tires helped harness the power, and reinforced transmission components ensured the car could handle full-throttle abuse. Inside, the GNX kept things mostly stock, a stealthy mix of plush 1980s Buick luxury with a few sinister flourishes. A numbered dash plaque, analog Stewart Warner gauges, and the now iconic horizontal turbo boost display gave drivers a subtle reminder they weren't in a normal Regal. The rest was pure Buick: thick padded seats, column shifter, fake wood, and a square dash that looked more accountant than assassin, which only made it more terrifying when the boost came on. An original GNX owner once said, "You'd pull up next to a Porsche wearing a tie, listening to AM radio, and still leave him sitting in a cloud of turbo noise and disbelief." That was the GNX's power, not just in numbers, but in character. It was a total contradiction. A luxury coupe that could launch harder than a Corvette, a V6 that could eat V8s alive, a Buick that struck fear into the hearts of every stoplight challenger. It was America's answer to the European turbo boom of the 1980s, wrapped in a shape that looked like it belonged in a retiree's garage. But GM had no plans to continue it. The G-body was being phased out. Front-wheel drive was the future. The GNX was, in every way, the last of its kind. A short, explosive finale to a dying era of analog, rear-drive American performance. Today, the GNX is more than just a collectible. It's a cultural artifact. Values have soared into six-figure territory for clean examples. Many were stored, cherished, and never driven hard, while others became street legends, feared and respected on drag strips and boulevards alike. And the nickname it earned back then still holds true today. It was the Darth Vader of Buicks, the meanest thing GM made all decade. A final blacked-out exclamation point at the end of the muscle car's second golden age, and a permanent icon in American performance history. Number 6. The 1981 Ford Mustang Cobra Turbo 2.3L is a footnote in Fox body history that most enthusiasts skip over. And yet, it's a fascinating relic of an era when automakers were trying desperately to reinvent performance for the fuel-conscious 1980s. While the Fox body Mustang would later achieve icon status thanks to the beloved 5.0-liter V8s of the mid to late 80s, this early Cobra Turbo was a very different beast. Smaller, lighter, and more cerebral, at least in theory. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but it was one of the very first attempts to mix muscle car attitude with modern turbocharged technology, and it did so with a hiss instead of a roar. By 1981, the American performance car was in crisis. Emissions regulations, fuel economy standards, and insurance premiums had gutted the V8 muscle machines of the 60s and early 70s. Automakers were scrambling to deliver something that could still look fast, even if it wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, actually drive with a hint of excitement. For Ford, the newly re-engineered Fox body platform, introduced in 1979, provided a lightweight, versatile base, but they needed to make it look edgy. Enter the Cobra. The Cobra name had always carried weight in Mustang lore, dating back to Carroll Shelby's brutal GT350s. But by 1981, that name was largely decorative. The Cobra Turbo was a trim package applied to the Mustang hatchback, meant to signal performance while tiptoeing around the fuel and emissions realities of the day. What you got under the hood was Ford's 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4, an iron block engine that was shared across other Ford and Mercury models, from the Fairmont to the Thunderbird. In naturally aspirated form, it was humble. With a Garrett turbocharger, it became slightly less humble. Ford rated the engine at 131 horsepower. Not much, even by early 80s standards. But peak torque didn't arrive until well past 3,000 RPM, and turbo lag was enormous. There was no intercooler, and boost control was rudimentary at best. Early reviewers described it as frustrating, unpredictable, and inconsistent. On cool days, it might surprise you. On hot days, it could barely get out of its own way. But on paper, the idea was compelling. A lightweight, sporty Mustang with modern, efficient power. In practice, it didn't quite work, but it hinted at a future Ford would eventually master with the later SVO. Visually, the 1981 Cobra Turbo was unmistakable. The package included blacked-out trim, a full front air dam, rear spoiler, and often wild decal packages with snakes, stripes, and racing fonts. Buyers could also spec TRX metric wheels with special Michelin tires, a feature that has become infamous today due to the near impossibility of finding replacements. Inside, the Cobra Turbo got sports seats, a 3-spoke steering wheel, and sometimes a turbo boost gauge, which mostly just told you when the car was trying very hard to be fast. Production numbers were low. Estimates suggest only around 4,800 were built in 1981 with the turbocharged engine, and fewer still were equipped with the 4-speed manual that made them remotely fun to drive. Most were sold and quickly forgotten, often traded in within a few years for V8 models when the 5.0 returned to prominence. Survivors are vanishingly rare today, often scavenged for body parts or stripped of their underwhelming engines. But among die-hard Fox body collectors, the 81 Cobra Turbo has earned a strange kind of respect, not for its performance, but for its audacity. It dared to reimagine what a Mustang could be at a time when muscle cars were almost extinct. It was an experiment, and while it didn't succeed, it paved the way for more sophisticated, forced induction Mustangs like the SVO, and decades later, the EcoBoost variants. One vintage Ford tuner once said of it, "It was a Cobra that hissed more than it bit." But back then, even the hiss was exciting. And maybe that's the best way to remember the 1981 Mustang Cobra Turbo. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the best handling, but it was different. And in the dark days of 1981, different was daring. It was Ford's whispered promise that performance would one day return, even if they had to figure it out one laggy turbo at a time. Number 7. The 1983 Mercury Capri RS 5.0 bubbleback hatchback is one of the most overlooked gems of the Fox body era. A car that, despite sharing much of its DNA with the beloved Mustang GT, carved out its own identity with distinct styling, lower production numbers, and an unintentional air of mystery. Today, it exists mostly as a curiosity at the edges of Mustang shows and Fox body forums. But in its time, the Capri RS was a quiet rebel, sleeker, sharper, and arguably better looking than the Mustang it shadowed. By 1983, the Fox body Mustang was hitting its stride. The return of the 5.0 V8, along with improved handling, lighter weight, and a more purposeful GT package, had rekindled America's love affair with affordable muscle. But what many people forget is that Mercury, Ford's upscale and more Euro-influenced division, also sold its own version of the Mustang. The Caprice shared the same platform, drivetrain options, and much of the structure, but Mercury gave it unique sheet metal, revised interiors, and a whole different attitude. The RS Rally Sport trim for 1983 brought with it Ford's reborn 5.0-liter HO-V8, rated at 175 horsepower and 245 pound-feet of torque. Respectable numbers at a time when many V8s were still suffering from emissions-era suffocation. The engine was paired with either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic, though the manual is where the RS really came alive. Underneath, you got the TRX Performance suspension and optional Michelin TRX metric wheels, a high-tech setup for its time, though one that would later frustrate owners with costly tire replacement issues. But what really set the 1983 Capri RS apart was its styling, especially the so-called bubbleback rear hatch. Instead of the sharply raked glass of the Mustang, the Capri wore a large, wraparound rear window that gave it a distinct European flair. The front fascia was also different, with a more angular grille and headlamp treatment, and the fender flares were slightly more pronounced, giving the RS a taut, muscular stance. Painted in deep metallics with blackout trim and red RS badging, the car looked faster than it was. and more expensive than it costs. Inside, the RS was surprisingly refined for an early 80s pony car. You got sports seats with deep bolstering, a unique Capri instrument cluster with more European-inspired gauges, and a thick-rimmed steering wheel that hinted at the car's performance intent. Options included air conditioning, power windows, and premium audio, making it feel more like a GT touring coupe than a stripped-down drag special. Yet despite all its strengths, the Capri RS 5.0 never gained the cult following of its Mustang sibling. Why didn't we? For starters, Mercury didn't market it nearly as heavily, and those who were interested in performance generally defaulted to the Mustang GT nameplate. Additionally, the Mercury brand was often seen as more mature or conservative, which didn't help attract the younger buyers that the RS was meant to entice. Only around 5,900 on RS 5.0 hatchbacks were built in 1983, and far fewer came with the manual transmission. Survivors are rare today, not because they were neglected, but because so few were saved. Many were driven into the ground, scavenged for their 5.0 drivetrains, or simply overlooked when collectors started scooping up Mustangs. It wasn't until years later that enthusiasts began to realize the RS was more than just a rebadged Mustang. It was a better-dressed, better-styled alternative that offered the same thrills in a rarer package. One longtime Fox body restorer put it perfectly. It was the better-looking Mustang, and no one noticed. In retrospect, the 1983 Mercury Capri RS 5.0 Bubbleback is a car that represents everything quirky and wonderful about early 80s performance, an era when American automakers were trying new ideas, dusting off old badges, and learning how to be fast again. It didn't wear stripes or shout at you with scoops. It just stood there, lean and muscular, a stealth fighter among Mustangs. And today, if you find one, especially in original trim, with the 5-speed and TRX package, you're looking at one of the rarest Fox body muscle machines ever built. Not just an oddball, but a secret star from a forgotten chapter of Ford performance history. Number 8. The 1986 Chevrolet Sprint Turbo is a fascinating, often overlooked artifact from an era when the American auto industry was grappling with new fuel economy standards, tightening emissions regulations, and shifting consumer demands. At first glance, it seems almost like a joke, a tiny, 3-cylinder, turbocharged hatchback bearing a Chevrolet badge, but built entirely by Suzuki, the Japanese automaker known more for motorcycles and small cars than muscle. But beneath its unassuming exterior lies a story of innovation, compromise, and a glimpse into the future of downsized performance. The Sprint was essentially a rebadged Suzuki Cultus, imported to the US to fill the demand for inexpensive, efficient transportation in the wake of the oil crises and rising gas prices. While the base models featured modest power plants suitable for city driving, Chevrolet saw an opportunity to differentiate the lineup and capture the attention of younger buyers by introducing a turbocharged variant. The engine was a 1.0-liter inline 3-cylinder, tiny even by Japanese K-car standards, equipped with a Garrett turbocharger. Despite producing just 70 horsepower, the engine delivered a surprisingly lively power band that rewarded revving thanks to the turbo's spooling and the light weight of the car. At a mere 1,750 to 1,800 pounds curb weight, the Sprint Turbo was featherlight, roughly half the weight of typical American compact cars of the time. This gave it a nimbleness and quickness that belied its modest output. The car's small size and lightness allowed it to dart through traffic and corner with an agility that larger cars could never match. The suspension was tuned for nimble handling rather than comfort, with minimal body roll and quick steering response, making it more of a fun little driver's car than a mere appliance for commuting. Fuel economy was another major selling point. While many muscle cars of decades past guzzled gas in obscene quantities, the Sprint Turbo managed over 40 miles per gallon on the highway, a remarkable figure for the mid-1980s. This efficiency, combined with its low initial purchase price, made it a practical choice for urban drivers facing rising fuel costs and increasing congestion. Yet despite these advantages, the Sprint Turbo was never destined for mass-market success. Its 3-cylinder engine produced a very distinct, high-pitched sound that some drivers found grating, and the turbo lag meant power delivery was abrupt and sometimes unpredictable. The car was never a drag strip star or a high-speed monster. Acceleration to 60 mph took upward of 12 seconds, putting it well behind the muscle cars of prior decades and even many contemporary compacts. Critics often dismissed it as a novelty or a grocery getter with a turbo, while enthusiasts struggled to find aftermarket support or parts, given its unique Suzuki underpinnings and small production numbers. Sales were limited, with fewer than 3,000 units sold in 1986 and a similar number in 1987 before the model was quietly dropped. Unlike other performance-labeled Chevrolets of the era, like the Monte Carlo SS or Camaro IROC-Z, the Sprint Turbo never built a cult following during its production years. It remained an oddball, a footnote in Chevrolet's history of performance cars. Today, surviving examples are rare and highly sought after by niche collectors who appreciate its uniqueness and the foreshadowing of modern turbocharged small engines. In many ways, the Sprint Turbo was ahead of its time, a light turbocharged car long before downsized turbo engines became the norm in the industry. It showed that power didn't always have to come from big V8s. It could be extracted from small engines with clever engineering and a willingness to embrace new technology. One Sprint Turbo owner famously put it this way: "Driving it was like holding a secret, turbocharged insanity in a package smaller than your kitchen table. It never sounded like a muscle car, but it felt like a tiny rocket on wheels." In retrospect, the 1986 Chevrolet Sprint Turbo serves as a reminder that American car makers were experimenting and evolving even during the toughest decades for performance. It's a quirky, endearing, and somewhat forgotten chapter. A turbocharged oddity that bridged the gap between the muscle cars of old and the modern era of forced induction and efficiency. Far from a joke, it was a pioneer hiding its potential behind an unassuming, pocket-sized frame. Number 9. The 1985 Chrysler Laser XE Turbo stands as one of the more intriguing, yet ultimately overlooked chapters in the saga of American sporty compact cars during the mid-1980s. At a time when muscle cars had largely faded into the rearview mirror and the automotive world was rapidly embracing front-wheel drive economy cars, Chrysler sought to inject some excitement and futuristic flair into its lineup. The Laser XE Turbo was meant to be the company's answer to the sporty coupes that were dominating youth culture, especially the Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Camaro. But it carried its own distinct, if quirky, personality, one that was equal parts promise and perplexity. Born as a badge-engineered cousin to the Dodge Daytona, the Laser shared much of its underpinnings with the Chrysler LeBaron Coupe, but was styled and equipped to feel sharper, more aggressive, and more technologically advanced. The XE Turbo trim level was the crown jewel, offering a turbocharged 2.2-liter inline-4 engine that cranked out a competitive 142 horsepower. While this figure paled in comparison to the muscle cars of previous decades, it represented a respectable output for a turbocharged four-cylinder in the era before widespread fuel injection and advanced engine management systems. The turbo setup delivered a noticeable boost, especially once the turbo spooled up, providing spirited acceleration that could surprise less informed drivers and offered a genuine sense of driving engagement. Styling-wise, the Laser XE Turbo made a strong statement. Its aerodynamic wedge shape, complete with sharp angles, a sloping fastback roofline, and distinctive pop-up headlights, positioned it as a sleek, modern coupe that looked ready to cut through the air. The body was tight and compact, but sported an aggressive stance that made the car appear quicker and more dynamic than it was. The blacked-out trim, racing-inspired wheels, and subtle spoilers contributed to its sporty image without veering into excess. The interior was a showcase of emerging automotive tech. Digital gauges replaced traditional analog dials, and the car featured a variety of voice alert systems that could notify the driver of low fuel, open doors, or even seatbelt reminders. In the mid-1980s, this kind of talking car technology was groundbreaking, offering a glimpse into the future of vehicle interaction. However, the Laser XE Turbo's innovations came with trade-offs. The digital dash, while futuristic, was prone to glitches and flickering displays that frustrated owners. The voice alerts, though clever, often became an annoyance, beeping and chiming incessantly at times for minor issues, which eroded the novelty factor quickly. Under the hood, The turbocharged engine, despite its potential, suffered from typical early turbo lag, a delay between throttle input and boost delivery that made throttle response somewhat unpredictable and challenging for drivers accustomed to the linear power of naturally aspirated engines. The car's suspension and handling were competent but not outstanding, calibrated more for everyday driving comfort than aggressive cornering, leaving it feeling somewhat uninspired behind the wheel when compared to rivals. Commercially, the Laser XE Turbo was a flop. The car struggled to find a foothold in a market increasingly crowded with Japanese imports, as well as domestic competitors that offered more power, better reliability, or stronger brand loyalty. Chrysler's marketing efforts were minimal and unfocused, failing to highlight the unique features that could have made the Laser stand out. Moreover, the badge-engineered relationship with the Dodge Daytona blurred its identity, making it difficult to build a passionate following. By the time the model was discontinued, only a few thousand XE turbos had been sold, cementing its status as a rare and somewhat forgotten piece of automotive history. Looking back, the 1985 Chrysler Laser XE Turbo is a fascinating time capsule, capturing a moment when American manufacturers were experimenting with technology and turbocharged small engines long before these became mainstream. It was an early attempt to redefine what performance could mean in a compact package, mixing digital innovation, forced induction, and sporty styling. Yet it was caught between eras. Too tech-heavy and quirky for traditional muscle car fans, and too underpowered and domestic for import enthusiasts, it ended up appealing to a niche few. For those who owned one or who seek them out today, the Laser XE Turbo is a symbol of ambition and unusual charm, a car that was trying hard to speak a language the market wasn't quite ready to hear. Its rarity, combined with its blend of futuristic tech and 1980s muscle spirit, has made it a prized curiosity among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate the oddball chapters of automotive evolution. As one former XE Turbo owner put it with wry humor, "It talked to you, beeped at you." Number 10. The 1982 Lincoln Continental Mark VI Pucci Designer Edition, especially the rare two-door variant, stands as a vivid testament to a fascinating, if ultimately quixotic, moment in American automotive history. At a time when the traditional big, luxurious land yachts were losing ground to smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles, and as the luxury car market began to fragment with the rise of European and Japanese imports, Lincoln attempted to reclaim its cachet by merging the worlds of high fashion and opulent motoring. Collaborations with well-known designers were an attempt to capture the imagination of affluent buyers who craved exclusivity, flair, and personal expression in their vehicles. The Emilio Pucci edition, named after the legendary Italian fashion designer, famous for his swirling psychedelic prints and pastel palettes, was perhaps the boldest and most visually distinctive of these efforts. This edition was distinguished by its unique, soft pastel exterior colors, a palette that ranged from delicate blues and pinks to muted lavenders and mint greens, something almost unheard of on American luxury sedans that had traditionally favored somber hues like black, navy, or burgundy. These colors gave the Mark VI a flamboyant, almost whimsical presence that made it stand out dramatically from the sea of darker, more conventional luxury cars. The paint was complemented by bespoke interior touches that truly embraced Pucci's flair, sumptuous velour and leather upholstery and matching pastel tones, custom embroidered fabrics, and finely tailored accents. Every inch of the cabin was carefully curated, from the color-coordinated carpets and trim to the exclusive designer badging on the seats, dashboard, and door panels. The wheel covers were also unique, featuring patterns that hinted at Pucci's signature motifs, making the car a rolling fashion statement. But while the Pucci Mark VI was undeniably a striking and beautiful car to behold, it was also a commercial and stylistic paradox. The styling of the Mark VI itself was a carryover from a previous era of American luxury, featuring heavy, slab-sided bodywork with a formal roofline and classic proportions that were increasingly out of sync with the evolving tastes of the early 1980s. Whereas European luxury cars were embracing sleeker, lighter, and more aerodynamic forms, and Japanese competitors were making strides in technology and efficiency, the Pucci Edition Mark VI remained a lumbering giant of a vehicle. Underneath its elegant exterior was the same 5.0 or 5.8-liter V8 engine that was more about smoothness and effortless cruising than sharp performance or fuel economy. While this powertrain delivered the expected Lincoln comfort and refinement, it also contributed to the car's image as an outdated holdover, ill-suited for the changing demands of luxury buyers. The two-door version of the Pucci Edition was especially rare, produced in numbers estimated to be just a few hundred. By the early 80s, demand for large two-door luxury coupes was plummeting as buyer preferences shifted toward practical four-door sedans or smaller, sportier cars. The Pucci Edition's premium pricing, significantly higher than the standard Mark VI, and its niche appeal meant that it sold poorly. Many potential customers were drawn to the concept of exclusivity but balked at the gaudy pastel colors or opted for more mainstream luxury options, often gravitating toward Cadillac Eldorados that offered comparable prestige with a more conventional image. Lincoln's marketing struggled to position the Pucci Edition in a way that could overcome these challenges, and the car quickly became a showroom oddity, often overlooked or misunderstood even by the brand's loyal customers. Today, the 1982 Lincoln Continental Mark VI Pucci Designer Edition two-door remains an elusive collector's gem. Its combination of striking aesthetics, extreme rarity, and its place as a cultural artifact from a bygone era makes it fascinating to enthusiasts of both automotive and fashion history. It symbolizes a time when American luxury automakers experimented with collaborations that sought to infuse style and exclusivity into their lineups at a moment of uncertainty and transition. The car's unique pastel colors and lush interiors evoke the glamour and excess of the early 80s, while serving as a reminder that not every bold fashion statement found a receptive audience in the automotive marketplace. As one automotive historian Riley noted, "It looked like a cocaine boss's dream, but even they bought Eldorados instead." In the end, the Pucci Edition Mark VI two-door is less a commercial success and more a cultural curiosity, a shining pastel-colored beacon of ambition and audacity from Lincoln's twilight years of the big personal luxury coupe era. For collectors and aficionados today, it is prized for its rarity, its undeniable style, and its embodiment of a moment when the worlds of high fashion. Number 11. The 1982 Lincoln Continental Mark VI Pucci Designer Edition, especially in its rare two-door form, stands as one of the most fascinating and extravagant attempts by an American automaker to fuse high fashion with luxury automobile craftsmanship during a transitional era in the automotive industry. At a time when the personal luxury car segment was facing declining popularity due to changing consumer preferences, increasing fuel economy regulations, and the rise of European imports, Lincoln sought a bold strategy to reinvigorate interest in its flagship Mark VI lineup. Partnering with famed Italian fashion designer Emilio Pucci, whose colorful, swirling prints had captivated the fashion world, Lincoln hoped to capture a niche market of affluent buyers craving exclusivity, style, and a car that truly stood apart from the crowd. The Pucci Edition was an audacious statement, a car finished in pastel shades rarely seen on American luxury sedans, soft pinks, pale blues, mint greens, and lavender tones that immediately set it apart from the typical blacks, whites, and earth tones that dominated luxury car lots. These subtle yet striking colors covered the car's long, formal body, accentuating the slab-sided, blocky silhouette that was characteristic of early 1980s American luxury, a design language that by this point was becoming an anachronism amidst the sleeker, more aerodynamic lines appearing on European and Japanese luxury sedans. But while the car's exterior colors hinted at modern flair, its overall shape and proportions remained firmly rooted in the late 1970s styling. Massive, stately, and unapologetically imposing. Inside, the Pucci Mark VI continued its fashion-forward theme with interiors that embraced the flamboyance of the designer's style. Lavish materials such as velour and fine leather were dyed in matching pastel hues, and upholstery fabrics featured subtle prints and embroidery inspired by Pucci's signature patterns. The cabin was a curated experience. Every detail, from the carpet color to the stitching on the seats and the badging on the dashboard, spoke of an exclusive collaboration between an automaker and a haute couture house. The attention to detail was meticulous, with custom wheel covers and exterior trim elements designed to complement the pastel theme, turning the car into a rolling canvas for Pucci's design vision. However, despite the undeniable aesthetic appeal and exclusivity, the Pucci edition struggled commercially. Its styling, especially on the exterior, was seen by many as outdated and too flamboyant, especially as luxury buyers were gravitating toward vehicles that looked more modern, efficient, and understated. The Mark VI platform itself was aging, still powered by large V8 engines that, while smooth and powerful, lacked the refinement, fuel economy, and emissions compliance becoming increasingly important to buyers in the early 1980s. The combination of a high price tag, well above many competitors, and a shrinking market for large two-door luxury coupes meant that production numbers were low, with estimates suggesting only a few hundred two-door Pucci editions ever built. Moreover, Lincoln's marketing struggled to communicate the car's unique blend of fashion and luxury in a way that resonated with the public. While the Pucci name carried cachet in the world of high fashion, that allure did not fully translate to the automotive sphere, where buyers often prioritize brand heritage, driving dynamics, and modern technology over bespoke design collaborations. The result was a car that was often overlooked or misunderstood by the very buyers it sought to attract, rendering it a rarity both on the road and in automotive history. Today, the 1982 Lincoln Continental Mark VI Pucci Designer Edition two-door stands as a remarkable artifact of a fleeting moment when American luxury automakers flirted with high fashion to arrest declining sales and relevance. Its combination of rare pastel paint schemes, lavish interiors, and ultra-low production numbers makes it a coveted collector's piece and a conversation starter among aficionados of both cars and design. It symbolizes the tension between style and substance, tradition and innovation, and the complexities of marketing luxury in an era of rapid cultural and economic change. As one automotive historian Riley observed, it looked like a cocaine boss's dream, but even they bought Eldorados instead. The Pucci Mark VI is more than just a car. It's a story of ambition, extravagance, and the challenges of standing out in a crowded luxury marketplace. Its faded pastel hues and plush interior fabrics echo a decade of excess and experimentation, making it a truly unique chapter in the saga of American automotive design. Number 12. The 1988 Dodge Shadow CSXT is one of those rare automotive oddities that perfectly captures the spirit of late 1980s American performance innovation, when turbocharged four-cylinder engines began challenging the muscle car establishment, and the muscle car legacy was finding new ways to survive amid changing market demands. The CSXT wasn't just a sporty variant slapped together for brand cachet. It was a deliberate, highly engineered collaboration between Dodge and Carroll Shelby, the legendary figure behind some of America's most iconic performance cars. This partnership aimed to transform an otherwise modest compact car into a legitimate performance machine that could hold its own against muscle car staples like the Mustang GT, but with a surprisingly nimble turbocharged heart under its hood. Only 1,001 CSXTs were produced, making this model one of the rarest factory-tuned Dodges ever built. These cars were not sold to the general public, but were instead created exclusively for thrifty rental companies' executive fleet, a highly unusual distribution channel for a high-performance vehicle. The reasoning behind this was twofold: to reward corporate executives with a unique, exciting vehicle, and to quietly showcase Dodge's ability to build turbocharged performance cars in a compact package. This exclusivity added a layer of mystique to the CSXT, but it also meant that most examples were driven hard and fast, reflecting their dual purpose as both executive toys and practical rental fleet vehicles. What made the CSXT so special was its comprehensive Shelby tuning package, which went far beyond mere cosmetic upgrades. Underneath its unassuming coupe body lay a sophisticated suspension system, expertly calibrated by Shelby engineers to deliver sharp, confident handling that defied the car's economy origins. The ride was firm but controlled, and the upgraded sway bars, springs, and shocks worked in concert to give drivers a feeling of connection and precision rare for the era's front-wheel drive compacts. Beneath the hood, the CSXT featured a turbocharged 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine, a modest displacement by muscle car standards, but with a spirited 175 horsepower on tap, it was more than enough to surprise unsuspecting drivers and onlookers alike. The turbo system delivered boost with enthusiasm, providing punchy acceleration and a satisfying turbo whistle that marked the car as a serious contender in the sport compact segment. Paired with a responsive 5-speed manual transmission, the CSXT could rocket from 0 to 60 mph in well under 8 seconds, a blistering time for a car of its class in 1988. Visually, the CSXT wore subtle Shelby-inspired graphics and badges that gave a nod to its performance pedigree without shouting for attention. The understated black and silver trim complemented the Shadow's aerodynamic profile, and while it lacked the muscular bulk or aggressive stance of traditional muscle cars, its sleek, compact form masked the fierce performance lurking within. Inside, the CSXT was equipped with upgraded seats and gauges that further distinguished it from the standard Shadow, creating an interior ambiance that blended sportiness with the modest practicality expected from a car originally conceived as an economy coupe. The car's role as a rental executive's vehicle, however, shaped its legacy in ways both fascinating and tragic. Most CSXTs were driven hard, often pushed to their limits by impatient corporate drivers who prized speed and excitement over long-term care. Consequently, many units wore out quickly or suffered mechanical failures, leading to a high attrition rate in scarce surviving examples. Unlike more traditional muscle cars, which often benefited from devoted enthusiasts and collectors preserving pristine specimens, the CSXT's rarity today is owed in large part to its relatively short service life and the unintended consequences of its unique distribution. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, its obscurity and fleeting existence, the Dodge Shadow CSXT has gained a cult following among collectors and aficionados who appreciate its unique blend of Shelby-tuned performance, turbocharged power, and rarity. It stands as a bold example of the era's experimentation, showing how American automakers attempted to reconcile tightening emissions regulations, shifting buyer preferences, and the muscle car spirit all at once. One former driver captured the car's dual nature perfectly with a mix of nostalgia and humor. It was the only rental car that could outrun a Mustang GT in 1988. Nobody believed it until they saw it happen, and then it was gone before they could catch it. Today, the 1988 Dodge Shadow CSXT remains a fascinating footnote in American performance history, a factory-built sleeper that quietly redefined what a muscle car could be in the turbocharged era. Its blend of Shelby tuning, forced induction, and rarity make it a prized collector's gem,